Hello and welcome to Hammer and Dice. In today's special Hallozine issue, we'll be looking at the Complete Vivomancer by Gavin Normal, and also From the Vats, which is put together by Gavin Normal but contains a whole variety of content from around the community. Before we really get into them, quick warning, both of these zines contain a lot of graphic material in the style of David Cronenberg. It features lots of concepts such as body horror, grotesque surgery, non-consensual surgery, and a small amount of the content is of a sexual nature or deals with the reproductive process, so please be advised. So to give a quick overview, the Complete Vivomancer is a new class for OSR style games. It is made for Labyrinth Lord, as it was created before Gavin Normal put together BX Essentials or Old School Essentials, which should easily work with any game that is in that lineage. The aforementioned Vivimancer is a magic user-based class that uses its grotesque and horrific magic to alter the bodies of the Vivimancer itself, as well as the bodies of others that either work for it or that have fallen prey to it. It is also an expert at creating magical creatures, either to serve it as bodyguards or servants in other capacities, or to function as reagents themselves for magical items, spells, or as part of a larger, greater, more horrific plan. The Complete Vivimancer zine contains the rules for the Vivimancer, spells for it ranging from first level spells all the way to 9th level spells, magic items that the Vivimancer can create through research, as well as specialist lab equipment that the Vivimancer will require to perform certain of the spells and to create some of the creatures that it will rely on for many of its abilities. From the Vats is a companion zine for the Complete Vivomancer, featuring extra content for the Vivimancer, such as extra spells and magic items, as well as a bestiary of 25 monsters that can serve as examples of things that the Vivimancer could create through its magics. In addition to this, there are 2 one-page adventures with a Vivimantic flair, as well as a full adventure location, the Spire of Sarpedon, which is the abandoned lair of a Vivimancer, which is fully stocked with monsters found in the bestiary, as well as loot that any aspiring Vivimancer would be keen to get their hands on. As we've got 2 zines to look at today, I'm not going to spend too long looking at each of them individually, but let's start by looking at the Complete Vivomancer. So this is a print on demand by Drive-Thru RPG, which was written by Gavin Normal, with art by Cadence D. Its construction is pretty straightforward, a glossy card cover with black and white illustrations throughout. The zine starts by giving the details and level progression of the Vivimancer, and then some notes on laboratory procedures, construction, maintenance, and how to manage experiment subjects. This section is well needed as lots of the spells that the Vivimancer can cast, especially getting towards higher levels, require a lot of laboratory equipment and potentially subjects either willing or unwilling to perform those magics on. So having these rules straight up at the beginning is very clear and will give them something players to work towards. And then, as you might have guessed, the main subject of this scene is the spells, and here is the full spell list for the Vivimancer, with all of these being present in the book. So as you can see, with 170 spells in total, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over these. They are so numerous that there's just too many to pick out. But as you can see from some of the names of them here, such as muscle control, symbiotic familiar, mutagen, plant metabolism, psionic awakening, regeneration, organ transference, replicate life form, genetic conduit, stabilized mutation, clone self, mutagenic zone, immortality, cannibal holocaust. There are a lot of interesting spells here that will have lots of different horrifying effects. And anybody that wanted to play a magic user that's not a straight wizard archetype, and that is a fan of horror tropes and archetypes, or at least familiar with them, might find themselves wanting to play this class, just to be able to use some of the spells in this list. So I'll just have a flip through these on my way to the next section, which contains magic items and laboratory equipment, and we'll take a look at some of the art along the way. So this piece of art here, fungal growth. So perhaps the most important Vivimancer spell is a 3rd level spell, Vats of Creation, which when used in conjunction with laboratory equipment allows the Vivimancer to create any life form they can dream of course, requiring the correct reagents and magic supplies. But this will enable the Vivimancer to really come into their own and feel like they're playing a Vivimancer rather than a particularly horrific wizard. organ transference greater, move brains between people. And then finally, 9th level spells, Artificial Intelligence, Cannibal Holocaust, Clone Self, Creeping Doom, Dispersed Mind, Extinction, Extraordinary Regeneration, Genesis, Immortality, Mutagenic Zone, Progeny, Temporal Stasis. So finally we come to magic items. Some of these magic items are what you traditionally imagine magic items to be, such as a potion made by a Vivimancer might be a special fruit that the juices of it imbue you with properties that a potion would usually, and that anything that the Vivimancer does create will have a distinctly organic feel to it, such as particular parchments created from the skins of magical creatures that will imbue the finished product with certain abilities. My favourite of these are lock roaches, which are small brass stick insects, which are a hybrid of insect and clockwork, which can be placed against a lock and their mandibles will open it. Here we then have a list of laboratory equipment, such as brain vats, twin vats, vats of accelerated growth, lenses, which are directly harvested from the eyes of creatures which have been created by the Vivimancers for this specific purpose. There are then plants and fungi, which, similar to the animals described in the previous section, are plants and fungi grown for the purpose of use by the Vivimancer as instead of a magic item. There is then quite a long list of potions, salts, salves and solvents, which have all different kinds of effects, such as the salts of desiccation, which rapidly draw liquid from the things that it's placed against. There are then some Vivimancer themed staves and wands, Staff of Flesh Dissolution, Wand of Dissolving, Wand of Muscle Control, Wand of Spasms, and that's the end of the magic items section. All of those have lots of different options of how you could use them, very horrific and very well themed for the Vivimancer. Quickly following this, there are the appendix for Psyonic Powers. This is a list of 10 Psyonic Powers that can be given to a creature or to the Vivimancer themselves through the Vivimantic spells or the Vivimantic creation process. And then there is rules for mutations, for adding mutations to creatures as a result of the Vivimantic process, either as a direct cause or as an indirect consequence. And then finally, there's Appendix 3, basic spells, for if you're playing a game with that isn't an advanced game. If you're just following basic rules, there's a condensed basic spell list there. So moving quickly on to From the Vats. From the Vats is compiled by Gavin Normal, but contains creations from a lot of different authors, so there's a full list of credits here, and as well the art is fairly varied and comes from a lot of different sources. Storming through this now, begins with the Submerged Spire of Sarpedon the Shaper, which is as you can see here, takes up the majority of the beginning of the scene, and the adventure gives details of approaching the spire, wandering monsters that you can find around it, details of its layout, and the contents of the 5 different levels within it. There are also guidelines here for running an underwater adventure, guidelines for moving around underwater, either going light or going heavy, and then advice for communicating magic and combat underwater. There are then 2 one-page adventures, The Sepulchre of the Clone and In Corpus Malum. These are both Vivimancers themed one-page adventures. I quite like In the Sepulchre of the Clone, as this design here with the adventure laid out with lots of little notes pointing at different places, really fun to read, but also packs in a lot of fun details that you can use throughout the adventure, and really makes the most of the single page that it's given, fitting in as much content as it can. So here we have the monsters, all of which are examples of creations which may emerge from the spawning vats and laboratories of the Vivimancers. Not all of these are completely horrific, and some even give thoughts to what a practically minded Vivimancer might create, such as arboreal cattle, which are a cross between a squirrel and a cow, and is a 6-foot long, 250-pound creature that lives amongst the trees and can be harvested for its meat and milk. But more in line with what you might think a Vivimancer might create is the body stealer, which is a 6-inch worm that can infect a person before bursting out of them in a horrific, almost alien-like way, before scuttling off into darkness, and will then grow to maturity, looking a lot like its host did in life, and then will return to civilization and try to find a host for its next generation of offspring. One of the creatures that can be found in the adventure at the beginning of the zine is a muscle jelly. These are found in the vats of an abandoned Vivimancer's lair, and have come about by the unsupervised growth of muscle cultures within those vats. So they're just large, roiling, mindless lumps of flesh that strike out at anything that comes near to them. A slightly more unusual creature that could be created by Vivimancer is a smoke. These are created by necromancers and vivimancers that specialise in the manipulation of bone that can be used to guard a specific location by engulfing interlopers and smothering them. Following the bestiary are some more magic items. My favourite from these are cloth life, which again is life created by vivimancers to serve a purpose. So these are pieces of clothing or paper that are in fact living, so do need to eat and can reproduce, etc. They each serve a purpose, so the subtype of cloth life capes are symbiotic to people, so they spend their life living on somebody, providing them cover and protection. But should you want to remove it, it will resist and start to attack you instead. Then a number of new spells. Sell your automaton, create organ golem, which allows you to create a sanguinary or a nervous engine, which are featured in the monster section before. Division of the creeping skin and division of the engulfing skin, which are two different variations of the Vivimancer being able to remove their skin and control it. Then minimus replication and vegetative transmutation, which brings us to the end of the scene. So I really like both of these zines. In particular, the Complete Vivomancer is great, adding a new class to old school style games. Even if you didn't want to add the Vivimancer itself into your game as an available class, adding the spells in this zine as scrolls for your magic user to find, or as something that a particularly evil opponent that your players are going to be facing against would use against them, would both be valid ways to use the content available in this zine, as well as the magic items being particularly weird or unusual, that things that your players could find. Perhaps even some of the less horrific ones could be gifts from druids or other nature-based classes that have been cultivating particularly magical fruits or creatures in their quest to preserve nature, and gift some of these things to the players as a reward for completing some quest or another. From the Vats is also a great zine, and I think it backs up the Complete Vivomancer really well. In particular, the monsters list in this would be great inspiration for any player wanting to play as a Vivimancer and wanting some ideas of what they could create. Although of course D&D classics such as the owlbear was said to be created by a wizard in a lab, so things like that could be the results of a Vivimancer creating a particularly stable breed which has then gone off into the wilds and established itself a niche in the ecosystem. One thing I will say is that the consistent art style in the Complete Vivomancer makes it feel like a much more cohesive product than from the Vats. That's not to say that anything in from the Vats is bad, and lots of the art is really good and either complements the creature that it's picturing or is a good representation of the location that it's describing. Using a single artist for the Complete Vivomancer certainly adds to the thematic cohesion of the zine. The one thing that from the Vats does have going for its advantage is that it is so cheap. It is very cheap on Drive-Thru RPG. I think it must be being printed at cost because it's so cheap. I'm not sure. That could be made. I could be lying there. But if you're interested in picking up some particularly horrific content this Halloween, then you won't go wrong picking up the Complete Vivomancer or From the Vats. This has been Hammer and Dice. Thank you for watching.